Aloha and e koma mai. Welcome to the 24th AMOS conference presented by Maui Economic Development Board. Please welcome Brian Whedon of Secure World Foundation to the stage.
All right, good morning, everyone. Those lights are bright. Aloha and happy Friday. It is Friday, right? I hope it's Friday. Welcome to the start of day 3 of this year's AMOS conference. This morning, we're honored to have with us Elizabeth Pearce, the Acting Director of Space Transportation Human Spaceflight from the Australian Space Agency, as our opening keynote. Liz Pearce began her career at the Bureau of Meteorology in 2010, categorizing space weather effects on the Australian power grid. From there, she worked at the Defense Science Technology Group in the areas of PNT and autonomy. And in late 2019, she transferred to the Australian Space Agency as part of the National Space Capabilities, Technologies, and Programs team. Liz is currently acting as the Director for Space Transportation and Human Spaceflight, leading a team who provides advice to the Australian government and the space sector on space transportation, space ports, human spaceflight, and space health. Please help me welcome Liz.
Aloha, everyone. Mahalo for having me here today. I'm very, very grateful to be here. This is my first AMOS, and I've had quite a good time, possibly too good a time, but it's just been fantastic. I'd like to start off by extending my deepest and heartfelt condolences to the people of Maui with the bushfires that you have recently suffered through. Bushfires in Australia is something we're quite familiar with. If we're not underwater, we're on fire. And we're just about to enter into our summer period, and I expect that we'll be suffering along with you in the same way. So when you were suffering, we felt you, we heard you, and we're here with you in spirit as you move through this very difficult time. So I'm here today to give you an education on SSA in Australia, what we have in Australia, our capabilities, our industry, and the direction that we're hoping to take in the near future. I'd like to start, though, by giving you a little bit of a history in the Australian Space Agency. So before you see the Australian Space Agency logo, and it's actually designed to incorporate constellations from our Indigenous people. Australia has the world's oldest astronomers as part of our culture, and we thought it was important to acknowledge their contribution to Australian space. I'd like to play you a short video that explains the constellations before you. It gives me chills, that video, every time I see it. It's just a lovely opportunity to showcase some of our national heritage, which I think is important, particularly in Maui, with such a rich culture here as well, which I personally have fallen in love with since I've been here. I've done a lot of shopping. I'm covered in local jewellery at the moment, actually, and I want to come back with, when I win the lotto, I'm going to hit the galleries up at the shops up the hill, and buy everything in there. It is just phenomenal. I'm so in love, and my boss has ruined me forever. I need to come back here forever now, so please invite me back. So Australia is a proud space nation. We actually have been involved in space for a long, long time. Going back to the 1950s, we have the Woomera precinct in the very middle of Australia. There's a whole lot of nothing there, but if you get a chance to go, I recommend it. It's like a moonscape out there. It's really, really beautiful landscape, and so many of the bugs can kill you. It's even unique to us. I saw my first scorpion out there, actually. And we were launching rockets from there with Europe back in the 1950s. And we still have access to that range now. There's quite a good museum there. Move forward to the 1960s when we finally designed, built and launched our first satellite, RESAT. And you can see a picture of the kangaroo on the side. There you go, there's a kangaroo. Got to have a kangaroo and everything. And then in the most iconic 1969 Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, our downlink capabilities actually fed that to the world, which was quite amazing. And I invite you to watch our local documentary on it. It's called The Dish. That's a joke possibly only about 10 people will get in the room. It's actually just a movie, but it's very, very good quality. It's got Sam Neill in it. I love that guy. So the Australian advantage, as the video showed, we are in a unique location in the world. In case you weren't aware, which I'm sure you all are, we're in the Southern Hemisphere, provides us a very unique view of the sky, and that is quite advantageous on an SSA capability perspective. The technology and capabilities and research organisations in Australia are actually quite cutting edge. But they're not very well known on a global scale because apparently we're not very good at shouting from the rooftops how amazing we are. So we're hoping to do a little bit more of that in the future. So if you're really interested in understanding how you can work with us, I invite you to see me after the talk. We're a good country to work with. We're pretty laid back. We sort of live in the Maui culture, I think, in all of Australia. We just like to do the job, get it done and do it right. We also have a unique situation. The Australian Space Agency is also the space regulator. So we actually have the opportunity between the regulation function and the rest of the Space Agency to inform the regulatory environment in Australia, but also take our industry and academic industry on the journey of how we can be responsible in space, so we can inform each other in both directions. In theory, the regulatory environment in Australia shouldn't squash the industry to move forward. It should enable them. Speaking of desirable geography, even space junk loves to live with us at the moment. This is just the last year. There's actually more than this, but these were the ones that I had good photos of. So on the left, this is a piece of rocket body that washed up in Western Australia. And it was quite the social thing. There were a lot of men around it with beers, or people around it with beers, trying to figure out what it was. I have been asked many times if it was an alien capsule, which surprised me at first, but then I thought, well, yeah, that could be, but it wasn't. A piece of SpaceX landed in the Snowy Mountains, and that was, it landed on a farmer's field, and that guy was really excited to have all the tourists turn up and try and take bits. And on the bottom right, this is a breakup of a Russian rocket body that was predicted to land just off the coast of Australia, but the trajectory that it takes is across all of Australia and across at least 2, maybe 3 populated cities, like big cities. And so it ended up breaking up over Melbourne and was quite visible, which the public were quite concerned about, but it presented no danger at the time. But as you can see, it's becoming more and more frequent as we have more things in space. We are a good landing pad, apparently. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the agency, here are some of the priorities that we have moving forward. They take a theme of developing our national space capability and our national space policy so that we have a national and whole of government approach to how we do space. Then we want to take that and we want to engage with you all in the room and those around the world who may be watching virtually. We want to engage internationally. There is a lot that we can learn from you and a lot we can share with you. So we want to make sure that we can do that clearly and effectively. We also want to be a responsible space sector. It's very important for us that as we emerge into space, that we are doing it safely and efficiently and responsibly in line with the agreements that we've signed up to, but also because it's the right thing to do. And last but not least, we have our Lunar Rover program, Trailblazer mission as part of Artemis. We're going to put a small rover on the moon. It may not seem like much to a lot of the people here who have done quite phenomenal things in space, but to Australia it's our flagship mission and we're incredibly proud. So the point of why I'm here, SSA in Australia. We've done a very, very big body of work actually to look at what we want to do in SSA in Australia. And I do use the term SSA, so Space Situational Awareness, on purpose rather than Space Domain Awareness, to identify the difference between us and the defence elements. So we're civil focused, but we have quickly realised that our national capability is not just the agency's responsibility, it is a whole of government process. So we're working in collaboration with other government departments to understand what our policies are, what kind of regulations we want to set up, but we wouldn't be doing that early because we want to make sure that our industry can thrive and survive. It's become very clear very quickly that as Australia we are a very big country, because we didn't know that before we started this. So to cover that kind of land we need a lot of sensors, but we also need a diverse range of sensors. There is no one capability that is going to solve our problem. We need it all, and we need more, and we need it all to work together. So we need to come at this from a national perspective. Our industry needs to join together, be united, and then that can then provide a united front to the international market. It's important for us to be clear about what we want to achieve as a nation so that we can then provide you the best capability that can solve the global problem. We're in this for the world, not just for Australia. So here we've identified the areas where there is opportunity for Australian industry to grow. We have identified areas that we have national, you know how your brain just goes to sleep and forgets the words that you're about to say? In my time zone, it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, so I'm just waking up. Excuse me. We want to have a competitive and comparative advantage on the international market. We're behind in a lot of ways from the global market, and we need to make sure that we find our niche where we can contribute effectively to the global community. And so these are the areas that we've identified, and they're all pretty straightforward, including space weather in this, which is my jam. If you want to have a very long conversation about space weather, please see me and I will happily indulge. But we're also identifying the fact that we need to incorporate regulations and standards into our approach, as well as coordination and governance. Because if we don't be clear about how we're doing this together, we're just going to end up in multiple directions and not as effective. This is my favourite slide. It showcases what we wanted to do when we developed this was actually understand what we have in Australia and what we can see. What orbits can we see? What capabilities do we have that can see those orbits? Do we have overlaps? Do we have gaps? And it actually became quite clear that we can see a lot with our capability. We have active and passive radar capabilities, which, you know, there's some groundbreaking technology in there that has not been seen around the world, and I'm very deeply proud of it. Passive optical, we've got a couple of companies that can do that in completely different but unique and impressive ways. Active optical, which to me means, you know, lasers. Lasers are fun, as long as they're pointed at the sky and not at anybody, you know, safety first. But space lasers. Passive RF is also another capability we have, which is very exciting. And on the space weather front, we actually have a quite extensive network of ionosondes around Australia, feeding into our space weather forecasting and model predictions for the Asia-Pacific region. We also, excuse me, we also house the deep space site for the Deep Space Network in Canberra. Well, Tidbinbilla is the town. And that is it's led by our local CSIRO, and who are in the room, shout out to you guys, and in coordination with NASA, JPL. So we can see a lot from Australia, and we also have some unique space-based sensors. as well, which is an up-and-coming area which can get some really fantastic imagery of local satellites and characterisation without the atmosphere causing problems. There we go. We've done a bit of investment in the local industry over the last few years. So for those of you who don't know, the Australian Space Agency is only 5 years old. And I've been there for 4 of those years. That makes me an old-timer in agency terminology, which is really exciting. And I've had the pleasure to watch our agency grow in its investment capabilities. So the first 2 investment programs we had when we started was the International Space Investment Initiative and the Space Infrastructure Fund. Both of these have now closed and finished, but what was really interesting, so out of the International Space Investment Initiative, there were 10 grants given, and 4 of those were SSA focused. With the Space Infrastructure Fund, there were 6 grants given, and 3 of those were SSA focused. So it really shows the priority of SSA in Australia. Here comes my favourite part. So SAC-T, it was mentioned yesterday in the policy forum in the panel in the beginning of the day. So for those who weren't listening, so SAC-T is a Sprint Advanced Concept Training exercise run out of JCO in the US, and shout out to Barb Golf who makes that work, I don't know if she's in the room. But she's brought Australia along on the journey. And I've been fortunate enough to watch that journey over the last 4 years. We've started off, the first SAC-T in Australia, we were all in one room, all of the sensor providers were in the one room, and the agency's role was just to walk around and learn and listen and watch, and that was the extent of our involvement. We only had a few companies participate in the Pacific Cell, and it was just a bit chaotic. It was amazing learning exercise. And over the years, so there's 3 exercises per year and 4 years. So there's 12 exercises straight up. And it's a chance to test our sensor capabilities, our data analysis capabilities, and then realise all the gaps in information that we have in Australia, not just in data, but also in information sharing. So for example, the head of the Space Agency, we need to tell him what happened. How do we do that? What is the reporting mechanism that we do that? The Prime Minister, if he needed to know what was going on, how do we tell him what happened? If this was an operational 24/7 capability, how do we communicate what we're seeing, if there's any decisions that need to be made, to people who have no idea how SSA works and why it matters? One of the most interesting events down here on the right, that's a screenshot that I took during, I can't remember which SAC-T specifically it was, but it was the Russian anti-satellite test. The Russians came to play with SAC-T that year, and they did that anti-satellite test during the Australian window of the exercise. So I don't condone that test at all. It was horrific and irresponsible and just plain stupid. But we were all watching. The entire country was watching. The agency was watching, Defence was watching, and we all saw it live, and we got to watch it unfold live and understand that, oh my goodness, what do we do about this? Who do we tell? Our sensors were watching the debris field begin and then start to wrap around the entire world in a ring, live. And I was watching, and I immediately became clear that we don't have anywhere near enough sensors to tell us what's going on. The time between updates was hours, many hours, and that can be the life and death of the people on the ISS, for example. It was quite significant. And so from then, we jumped in headfirst to SAC-T. We've been very, very lucky to have the opportunity to get into the white cell and the blue cell. So for those who aren't aware, white cell is the team who create the tasking, say, hey, I need some data that looks at this satellite or this piece of debris we've identified, and the blue cell are the people who do it. And we've participated in both. It's an exercise in learning and our understanding, and every time we get more and more involved in this. And a shout out to Bella Hattie, the girl on the right, bottom left there. She's the space agent who's now doing JCO training to become an operator, which is just phenomenal. She is the best of us, and she'll be here in a couple of years, I think, leading the world. So this has forced us to look at how we approach space traffic management and SSA as a whole. We're looking at it as a whole of government approach. And we've got 4 main areas of focus to understand what we need to be doing. So how do we communicate the risks to those who have no idea what's going on? How do we have a debris response capability? Because as you saw, all the debris is landing in Australia, so we need to understand what's coming, what's the likelihood of it hitting people, hitting populated areas, hitting nature reserves. We need to understand space, so we actually have to have space situational awareness, and we have to have tracking and forecasting for our risk profile. And as we move forward, we don't have a lot of things in space right now that are Australian owned and operated, but we're going to be. We're going to space, we're going to be putting more and more things in space, and we have the unique opportunity to actually do this right from the beginning, to track everything we have, to understand where it is, and to have an end-of-life plan. So that's actually quite nice. We can learn from the well-established space industry. Here's something we've been playing with. So we've been playing just with the spacetrack.org data. And this is all of the re-entries over Australia since 2004, so the last 20 years-ish. So this is representing the 10-kilometre altitude predicted re-entry point. And I tell you what, I see the Australian Space Agency logo there, almost. And I don't want that to happen. That's not a good thing. So there's a lot of land and a lot of water around Australia that we need to be responsible for. So this really highlights to me that there's a lot of work that we need to do to understand the risk to our local area. And this leads us to a parallel effort that we have going in Australia on sustainability, space sustainability, and it's not just SSA, but sustainability in all aspects of space, including spaceports, developing responsible spacecraft, maintaining dark and quiet skies. It's something that I very deeply appreciate coming from a rural area where you could see all of the stars, and now it's getting quite difficult. And also as we go to the moon, being sustainable and responsible on the moon. We don't want to be creating a mess up there. It's a pristine environment. We have a chance to do this right from the very, very beginning. And this is all leading to IAC in 2025. It's in Sydney. I hope to see you all there. It's going to be a giant party. And it's got a sustainable space theme. So it's going to be massive. I really invite you all to come. I invite you all to come and talk to Australia, come and talk to the Australian Space Agency, work with us on how we can be sustainable in space, how we can work on our SSA efforts. As I said, it's a global problem. It is not just Australia's problem. And we can celebrate in 2025 with how awesome we are. We've solved the world's problems by then. It's only 2 years away. We can do that. I have faith in you. And that is the extent of what I have to say today. I invite you to submit any questions. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Liz. That was great. We do have time for a few questions, so please submit some if anyone in the audience has any. I'll just say I was in another Ops Center on January 11th, 2007, so I can completely identify with that spectrum of emotions that you went through with the Russian ASAT test. A couple of questions that we have here. One, does Australia intend to establish its own national space traffic coordination system database similar to what TRAX is planned for in the US?
That's an excellent question. So we're in the moment actually trying to establish that answer ourselves. We're looking at what we need as Australia. The US is a very, very close partner and ally. And so we're very in deep conversation with the Department of Space Commerce and the JCO to understand what we can be a part of on a global effort, as well as what we need nationally. So I don't have an exact answer yet, but we're actually investigating that right now. We want to be doing something. What that something is yet to be determined. And if you have an opinion on that, please come and see me, and I will definitely take it on board.
Great. I'm going to combine two different questions here together. One says, what kind of industry partnerships are there available to work with companies, organizations in Australia on SSA or other topics? And related to that, there's a question here about whether the needs from the Australian Space Agency for supercomputing infrastructure, analytic capabilities, might that be part of those partnerships or something you guys are looking to build up?
Yeah, excellent questions. So one of the grant programs I identified earlier, part of the Space Infrastructure Fund, is actually the Pawsey supercomputing facility in Western Australia. It's part of what is now called the Australian Space Data Analysis Facility. And that is designed to be a repository for data in Australia on the SSA effort. So they are very open and willing to partner with people for that, including actually mission design to maximise the data you can get and how you can achieve it before you even start gathering your data. So that's actually a really fantastic opportunity, and they're welcoming any partnerships at any time. Our local industry and academic institutions are open and ready to partner. We have a lot to learn from our international community, and the Space Agency sees our role as the facilitator for those collaborations. So please reach out if you're interested in partnering. We're here to partner, definitely.
You mentioned you're working with the US-led SAC-T effort. Has there been similar discussions or efforts to work with other entities in the Indo-Pacific region on SSA collaboration, sharing, coordination?
Yes, so it's actually a very, very strong topic of conversation. At the exact moment we're here, there is the Asia Pacific Region Space Agency Forum, APRSAF, occurring in Singapore, I think it is. And the Deputy Head of the Space Agency is there representing us now. And I had the fortune to attend it last year in Vietnam. Fantastic conference. If you ever get a chance to go, it was a lot of fun. This one might be just a bit better. I'm a bit biased because I'm here wearing very, very beautiful flowers. So we had a lot of conversations with the Asia Pacific nations at that forum, and every single one of them said that SSA was a priority for them, and they're looking to Australia to lead the Asia Pacific region on that. And so we're hoping to do a lot more, as you saw from that diagram of the re-entries over Australia. There's a lot in the water, and what wasn't clearly identified is all the island nations that are in that water. There is a lot actually around Australia, and we feel it's our responsibility to use our influence in the Pacific region. So, yes.
So we'll close out on a space weather question and get about 2 minutes. So
okay, thank you. Just start jumping up and down when I go too long.
And the comment is, and the question is, could you comment on sort of the primary space weather capabilities and needs that Australia has?
Okay, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. So we have all our space weather from a government perspective operates through the Bureau of Meteorology. There's the Space Weather Services Forecasting Centre. It's actually co-located with the Australian Space Agency in Adelaide. I had the opportunity to work there for a year and understand the risk to Australia from space weather, particularly around geomagnetically induced currents. And the summation of that research basically came to, we're not low or high enough in latitude to be at a high risk, but Tasmania is our weak point, so we just have to cut them off if anything happens. Sorry to all those Tasmanians who may be watching. We'll see you on the other side of the Carrington event. We have a very extensive network of sensors around Australia, but we need more. And we're actually doing some work around the local ionospheric modelling over Australia, because we have such a large land mass and we go into quite equatorial regions. Local models are important. Global models don't quite accurately represent Australian ionospheric needs and love. My personal dream is to have all of the satellites, all of the rovers, everything that ever goes into space, having space weather sensors on them at all times. Just flood us with data, because data is life, and I will just happily live trolling through that data for the rest of my life. Particularly as we move into space, I think it's important for us to understand the space weather context in relation to people in space. It's not something that we've had to do a lot of, and I'm sure the US are far further down that path, as you have quite a significant number of astronauts operating on the ISS and going to the moon. We are lucky to have our own astronaut in training at the moment. Catherine Burnell-Pegg is with ESA at this moment, training to be an astronaut. It's an Australian first to be trained under the Australian flag. Very, very proud. She's a good friend of mine, and She's the best of us. She's just phenomenal and inspiring. So if she went into space, we need to make sure she's safe. I don't know if I've answered your question because I have like 3 more hours of things I need to say, so I'll just stop there.
All right. Everyone should please join me in thanking Liz.
Thank you.